The crimson dust swirled menacingly against the fortified windows of the refuge, painting macabre shadows across Lyra's face as she pressed her forehead against the chilly, reinforced plasteel. Her antennae quivered, detecting the erratic electromagnetic fluxes of the approaching tempest. The shelter's systems blinked alarming lights across the control panel, oxygen levels were plummeting, and shield integrity was at a precarious 47%. "Command, this is Secondary Research Unit Lark, please respond," her voice trembled, despite her best efforts to maintain an air of composure. Static crackled through the communication system, followed by an unsettling silence that caused her heart to race. She had lost contact with the expedition group 3 hours prior when the main excavator suffered a critical malfunction, leading to a hasty evacuation. In the resulting chaos, she became detached from the others, barely reaching this emergency shelter before the storm engulfed them. Lyra's silver eyes flickered toward the ancient artifact resting on the workbench, a crystalline construct, no larger than her palm, covered in markings that bore no resemblance to any known civilization in charted space. It pulsed with a faint, blue glow, almost mockingly. She wondered, was it worth it? Was this discovery truly worth dying for? The shelter's computer emitted yet another warning: oxygen levels were critical, with an estimated 42 minutes of breathable atmosphere remaining. Lyra's scaled fingers flew across the console, desperately trying to divert power from non-essential systems. The Umari were an adaptable race, but even they required oxygen to survive. Her people had always prided themselves on their self-sufficiency, on never needing assistance from the other spacefaring races, particularly not from them. A shiver ran through her body at the mere thought of the humans. Since childhood, she had been taught about their barbarity, their insatiable hunger for conquest, the devourers, they were called in the old legends, creatures who consumed not only flesh but entire civilizations, leaving nothing but stripped worlds and broken peoples in their wake. The storm intensified, rattling the shelter walls. Through the swirling crimson haze, something caught her attention, a dark shape moving through the maelstrom. At first, she dismissed it as debris, but then she realized the movements were too deliberate, too purposeful. Her blood ran cold as the figure drew nearer, tall, clad in its environmental suit, moving with an inexorable determination that spoke of predatory intent. A human. No, no, no. Lyra scrambled away from the window, knocking over equipment in her panic. Her training had not prepared her for this. All the stories, all the warnings, they were supposed to be theoretical, academic. She wasn't supposed to actually encounter one. The figure reached the shelter's entrance, metal scraped against metal as it accessed the external control panel. Lyra's hand shook as she grabbed a laser cutter from her tool belt, a pathetic weapon, but it was better than nothing. The airlock cycled. Lyra backed into the furthest corner, her scale skin flushing darker with fear. The inner door opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure, and the humans stepped inside. They were colossal, easily 7 feet tall in their suit. The helmet's faceplate was polarized, revealing nothing of what lurked behind it. The humans' movements were slow, deliberate, like a predator trying not to startle its prey before striking. To Lyra's astonishment, they first moved to the environmental control panel. Fingers danced across the interface with practiced efficiency. The shelter systems hummed back to life, oxygen levels began to stabilize. The human then turned toward her, raising their hands in what she realized was meant to be a non-threatening gesture. When they spoke, their voice was filtered through the suit's external speakers, surprisingly gentle. "Easy now, I'm not going to hurt you. I'm Jake Hollister, independent rescue operator. I picked up your distress beacon." Lyra did not lower the laser cutter. "Stay back. I know what you are. What your kind does to others." The human, Jake, tilted his head. "What I am is someone who flew through a category for storm to answer a distress call. What I'm doing is trying to keep you alive." He gestured to the shelter systems. "You had about 30 minutes of oxygen left, less with this panic attack you're having. Why should I trust you?" Lyra's antennae flattened against her skull, a clear sign of distress to her people. "Because I'm your only shot at getting off this rock before that storm tears this shelter apart." Jake's voice remained calm, professional. "Look, I get it. You're Amari, right? Your people don't interact much with humans, but right now you've got two choices. Trust me and live, or stay here and die. Your call. Lyra's grip on the laser cutter wavered. Everything she had been taught screamed at her to fight, to run, but there was something in the way he moved, in how he had immediately worked to save her life instead of attacking, that did not match the stories. A violent tremor shook the shelter, making her stumble. Jake's hand shot out to steady her, but he stopped himself short of touching her, respecting her space. That's the storm's leading edge, he said. We've got maybe 10 minutes before the main force hits. What's it going to be? Lyra looked at the artifact on the workbench, then at the raging storm outside. Finally, she met the dark faceplate of Jake's helmet. If you try anything, you'll be cut in half with that construction tool you're pointing at me. Got it? Was there a hint of amusement in his voice? Grab whatever you need. My ship's anchored 200 meters north. We'll need to move fast. As Lyra carefully packed the artifact, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything she thought she knew about humans might be wrong, or perhaps, this one was different. Either way, she was about to find out. The shelter groaned ominously around them as she sealed her suit and checked its integrity. Jake waited by the airlock, his posture suggesting neither threat nor impatience, just quiet confidence. Ready? He asked as she approached. Lyra clutched her sample case to her chest, taking a deep breath. No, but I don't have much choice, do I? There's always a choice. Jake's hand hovered over the airlock controls. Just sometimes all the options are bad. Stick close to me out there. The storm's going to try its best to kill us both. As the airlock cycled, Lyra realized she was about to entrust her life to a member of the species she had been taught to fear above all others. The irony wasn't lost on her, neither was the fact that despite everything she'd been told about humans, this one had come alone into a deadly storm to save a stranger. Perhaps there was more to learn about humans than what was written in Umari legends. If she survived this day, she might get the chance to find out. The storm hit them like a physical wall as they stepped out of the shelter. Crimson sand particles swirled around them, reducing visibility to mere meters. Jake's armored form, ahead of her, was barely visible through the maelstrom, a dark shadow against the blood-red chaos. Stay connected. Jake's voice crackled through her comm, a tether line shot from his suit magnetically attaching to her environment suit's belt. If we get separated in this, you're dead. Lyra wanted to object to being literally tied to a human, but another blast of wind nearly knocked her off her feet. The tether went taut as Jake steadied her. Trust the line, he said. I've done this before. They pushed forward into the storm, Jake taking the brunt of the wind while Lyra followed in his wake. The sand scratched against their suit's exterior, the particles so fine they could work their way through any imperfection in the seals. Your people, Jake's voice came through between wind gusts. They really teach you we eat other species. Is this really the time for cultural exchange? Lyra ducked under a piece of debris that went sailing past. Got to pass the time somehow. Besides, I'm curious what other horrible things you've heard about us. Despite herself, Lyra found his tone almost playful. The stories say humans consumed entire civilizations, that you're driven by base instincts, unable to control your violent urges. Who? Jake paused to check their heading on his suit's navigation system. And yet, here you are, following one of these dangerous predators through a storm. As you pointed out, my options were limited. Fair enough. He reached back to help her over a particularly treacherous ridge. Though I should mention the only thing I've consumed today is synthetic coffee. Terrible stuff. A warning light flashed in Lyra's helmet. My suit's losing integrity. The sand is degrading the seals. Mine too. Jake's tone shifted from casual to professional in an instant. We need to move faster. Ship's just ahead. They quickened their pace, but the storm intensified around them. A massive gust caught Lyra, lifting her off her feet. The tether went taut, and she found herself dangling like a kite in the crimson wind. Hold on. Jake braced himself, slowly reeling her in. I've got you. Another gust slammed them both into a rock formation. Lyra's suit alarm shrieked as a crack appeared in her faceplate. Jake immediately pulled her close, shielding her from the worst of the storm with his larger frame. Suit breach! Lyra's voice rose in panic as toxic atmosphere began seeping in. Don't breathe. Jake's hands moved with surprising dexterity, pulling an emergency seal patch from his belt and applying it to her cracked faceplate. Breathe now, slowly. Check your readings. Lyra's hearts were racing, but the patch held. She found herself pressed against Jake's armored chest, his bulk providing shelter from the wind. The proximity should have terrified her, but somehow it didn't. We need to run, Jake said. My ship's just over that ridge. Can you make it? Do I have a choice? There's always a choice. She was starting to recognize the smile in his voice. Ready? They ran, the wind howling around them, throwing debris and sand, trying to tear them apart. Jake kept himself between Lyra and the worst of it, his larger suit taking impacts that would have knocked her down. Finally, a dark shape emerged from the storm, a small ship anchored against the wind with magnetic grapplers. Jake pressed his hand against the hull scanner, and a boarding ramp extended. Inside now. They stumbled into the airlock together as the storm raged outside. The cycle seemed to take forever, but finally, the inner door opened. Clean, breathable air filled Lyra's lungs as she removed her damaged helmet. Jake removed his helmet too, and Lyra saw a human face for the first time. He had sharp features, tan skin, and eyes the color of Eric Caron's stones. A scar ran along his jaw, and his dark hair was matted with sweat. He looked surprisingly normal. Welcome aboard the Starcatcher, he said, running a hand through his hair. She's not much, but she's home, and she's got a great life support system, which is what we need right now. Lyra realized she was staring and quickly looked away. Thank you for saving my life. All part of the service. Jake moved to the cockpit, beginning pre-flight checks. Though, I have to admit, this is the first time I've rescued someone who thought I might eat them. About that. Lyra felt her scales flush with embarrassment. Perhaps some of our stories about humans are exaggerated. You think? Jake's laugh was unexpectedly warm. Though, I have to ask, what were you doing out here alone? This moon isn't exactly a tourist destination. Lyra hesitated, then pulled out the artifact she had rescued. We were studying this. My team found it buried in the ancient ruins. Nothing like it has ever been recorded. Jake leaned in to look, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Interesting. And your team? We lost contact when the excavator malfunctioned. They should have made it to the primary shelter, which is why we're going there next. Jake strapped himself into the pilot seat. Strap in. It's going to be a rough ride through this storm. And Lyra? Yes? Just so you know, the only thing I hunt these days is people who need helping. Though I do enjoy a good synthetic steak now and then. Despite everything, Lyra found herself smiling. The human, Jake, was nothing like the monsters from her childhood stories, he was something else entirely. The ship lifted off, fighting against the storm's fury. As they ascended, Lyra watched Jake's confident handling of the controls, the way he anticipated and compensated for each gust and tremor. She had a feeling her encounter with this human was going to change more than just her day, it might change everything she thought she knew about his species, and somehow that thought wasn't as frightening as it should have been. The Starcatchers fought against the storm's grip, engines straining as Jake guided them through the churning atmosphere. From the co-pilot seat, Lyra watched his hands dance across the controls with practiced ease, each movement precise and purposeful. Your ship, she said, trying to distract herself from the turbulence, it's not a standard rescue vessel. Jake's lips quirked. That obvious, who? The ship banked hard to avoid a debris field. She's modified. Used to be a military scout ship before I acquired her. Acquired? Let's just say her previous owners weren't using her for anything noble. His eyes remained focused on the navigation display. I gave her a better purpose. A particularly strong gust rocked the ship. Lyra's antennae vibrated with the electromagnetic disturbance. We're heading straight into the storm's core. No choice. Your team's shelter is on the other side. Jake glanced at her. Those antennae. They sense EM fields? Yes, it's how my people navigate the storms. It's wrong, the patterns aren't natural. That caught his attention. What do you mean? Before she could answer, the artifact in her sample case began to pulse with increasing intensity. The blue light synchronized with the storm's electromagnetic pulses. Jake, Lyra's voice tightened with concern. I think we need to. A massive energy surge hit the ship. The controls sparked, and the main power failed. They began to fall. Hold on. Jake's hands flew across the backup systems. Come on, girl, don't fail me now. The ground rushed up to meet them through the viewport. Lyra clutched her seat, her heart pounding, but Jake focused, his movements calm even as alarms blared around them. At the last possible moment, he engaged the emergency thrusters. The Starcatcher pulled up, skimming the surface before settling into a rough, but controlled landing. Everyone alive? Jake asked, running system diagnostics. Physically, yes. Lyra's hands were shaking. But that wasn't a normal power failure. The artifact, it reacted to something in the storm. Jake unbuckled and moved to examine her sample case. May I? Lyra hesitated only briefly before nodding. Jake carefully lifted the crystal artifact, studying its pulsing light. It's a key, he said quietly. What? The markings, the energy signature. I've seen something similar before, years ago. His expression grew serious. This storm, it's not natural. Because it's not really a storm. It's a defense system. Lyra's antennae twitched. The ruins we were excavating, probably more than ruins. Jake set the artifact down gently. Whatever civilization built this, they left more than just artifacts. They left guardians. A deep rumble shook the ship. Through the viewport, they watched as the ground before them began to shift and rise. Ancient mechanisms, dormant for millennia, awakened. Jake, Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. What do we do? He turned to her, and she saw something in his eyes, not fear, but excitement. We've got a choice to make. We can try to wait this out, hope whatever's happening stops on its own. Or, we just discovered something that could rewrite the history of this sector, and your team might be in the middle of it. He grinned. Want to find out what's really buried on this moon? Lyra looked at the human, this contradiction of everything she'd been taught to fear, and made her decision. You're insane. I prefer adventurous. Fine, but if we die, I'm blaming you. Fair enough. Jake began gathering equipment. For what it's worth, this beats my usual rescue missions. Normally it's just pirates or mechanical failures. Ancient alien mysteries are a nice change of pace. They suited up again, checking each other's seals. Lyra found herself surprisingly comfortable with Jake's proximity as he helped her secure her patched helmet. Stay close, he said, his voice serious despite his earlier levity. Whatever's out there, we face it together. Together, Lyra agreed, surprising herself. Though, I still don't entirely trust you. Of course not. We just met. Jake cycled the airlock. But trust is earned. Let's go earn some. They stepped out into the storm together, but this time Lyra wasn't following out of desperation. She was choosing to trust this human, this enigma who had shattered her preconceptions with simple acts of kindness and courage. The ground continued to shift before them, revealing glimpses of ancient metal and crystal beneath centuries of sand. The artifact pulsed in its case, calling to something deep below, and as they made their way toward the awakening ruins, Lyra realized that perhaps the most dangerous thing about humans wasn't their supposed savagery. It was their ability to make the impossible seem worth trying.